For centuries, monarchies weren't just a thing, they were the thing. If you had a crown and a few castles, you basically ran the world. Kings, queens, emperors, they ruled by bloodline, divine right, or just really good PR. In Europe alone, over 20 monarchies were still alive and waving in the early 1900s. But give it 100 years, boom. A lot of those crowns hit the floor hard. So what happened? Why did some of history's oldest and flashiest dynasties suddenly find themselves out of work? What brought down rulers who once felt untouchable? Revolutions, world wars, or just people getting tired of royal drama? Today, we're digging into 7 monarchies that don't exist anymore. Each one had its moment in the sun: France, Russia, the Ottomans, even Hawaii. And each one eventually got swept off the stage. And trust me, it's not just about kings losing their thrones. It's about how power changes, how people push back, and how history tends to whisper, okay, time's up. Let's go back just over 100 years, say around 1900. And Europe looked like a royal theme park. Seriously, every other country had a king, an emperor, a tsar, or some guy with way too many medals and a fancy beard. France had done the guillotine thing already, sure, but Germany had the Kaiser, Russia had the Romanovs, Austria-Hungary had Emperor Franz Joseph, who, I kid you not, ruled for 68 years. That's longer than most light bulbs last. Even outside Europe, places like Hawaii, Nepal, the Ottoman Empire, kings and queens were still running the show. If your country didn't have a crown, it was kinda weird. But here's the thing, most of those monarchies? Gone now. Not faded out quietly, more like toppled, blown up by revolutions, wars, or, in some cases, just people getting real tired of royal nonsense. So what happened? Well, imagine living under a ruler who never had to apply for a job, never faced elections, and could make your life harder just because he felt like it. Now, imagine that ruler being wildly out of touch, throwing lavish balls while people outside were starving. That was kind of the vibe in a lot of places. People started asking, wait, why are we letting one family run everything? And that's where ideas like republic and democracy started sneaking in, fueled by philosophers, rebels, and, honestly, just basic common sense. Some of it came from Enlightenment thinkers in the 1700s. Others were just watching the neighbors and thinking, yo, France just got rid of their king, maybe we could try that too. The French Revolution was the first major mic drop. They literally said, let's cut ties with the monarchy and then actually cut the king. Louis XVI lost his head in 1793, and that moment sent shockwaves. Monarchs across Europe suddenly got very, very nervous, and for good reason. Because once the idea was out there, that power doesn't have to come from some crown but from the people, it didn't go back in the box. Now, some monarchies adapted. They gave up power, went constitutional, and basically turned into national mascots. Looking at you, UK. But others? They held on too tight, and when revolutions came knocking, whether from communists, colonists, or just angry citizens, they fell hard. Each fall had its own flavor. In Russia, it was the Bolsheviks. In Austria-Hungary, it was World War I and nationalism pulling everything apart. In Hawaii, it was American businessmen, because of course it was. And in Nepal, it was civil war and a king who got caught in the wrong century. But what's wild is how fast it all happened. At number 7, Kingdom of France. Now let's start with France. You know, big castles, powdered wigs, way too many fancy forks. For centuries, the French monarchy was the real deal. We're talking divine right of kings, Versailles-level luxury, and a royal family that honestly thought God picked them for the job. The French kings ruled for nearly 1,000 years, and they didn't just chill in castles. They expanded the empire, built a global presence, and threw the kind of parties that probably needed a second country just for cleanup. But by the late 1700s, the party was over. France was broke, the people were starving, the king was still buying furniture. And then came 1789, the French Revolution. Boom! People stormed the Bastille, the king lost control, and suddenly divine right didn't mean much when you're staring at a crowd with pitchforks. Louis XVI, off with his head. Literally, in 1793, the king was executed by guillotine in front of thousands. And just like that, the monarchy was gone. Well, kind of, because guess what? France brought it back twice. After the revolution, they had Napoleon, not a king, but kind of an emperor. Then came another royal comeback with Louis XV, then another revolution in 1830, then another king, then another revolution. France really couldn't make up its mind. It all finally ended in 1848, when the last king, Louis Philippe, ran away after protesters turned up outside his palace. And France was like, okay, for real this time, no more kings. France's monarchy didn't just collapse. It unraveled, slowly, painfully, and publicly. It was the blueprint for how to end a royal regime, and it inspired revolutions around the world. So yeah, France kicked things off with a bang, and once that crown hit the ground, it didn't take long for others to start wobbling too. 6. Russian Empire. If France was the warm-up act, Russia was the main event. Huge land, huge empire, huge trouble. For over 300 years, the Romanov dynasty ran Russia. Tsars were more than kings, they were seen almost like gods. Big churches, golden robes, palaces as far as the eye could see. But the empire kind of cracked beneath the surface. By the early 1900s, Russia was falling behind. While the rest of Europe was industrializing, Russia was stuck, with peasants working land they didn't own, and the royal family pretending like everything was fine. Then came World War I, and Russia was not ready. They lost battles, people starved, morale collapsed, and Tsar Nicholas II, the guy in charge, decided to take control of the army himself. Bad idea. He didn't know what he was doing, and the empire basically spiraled. By 1917, the people had had enough. Protests in Petrograd, bread riots, soldiers joining the crowds instead of stopping them, and finally, Nicholas gave up the throne. But the real twist? The Bolsheviks. Led by Lenin, they didn't want just a new government, they wanted a new world. No kings, no nobles, just workers and revolution. In October 1917, they stormed the Winter Palace. It wasn't a bloodbath, just a couple of guards, really. But it felt like the world turned upside down. The Romanov family, sent into exile, and in 1918 they were killed. All of them shot in a basement in Yekaterinburg. The fall of the Russian Empire wasn't just a collapse, it was a clean slate. The monarchy didn't just end, it was erased. And what came next changed the 20th century. Russia didn't just lose a monarchy, it lit the fuse for an entirely different world, one with red flags, iron curtains, and decades of tension. 5. AustroHungarian Empire. Now imagine running a country where almost nobody speaks the same language, follows the same customs, or even wants to be part of the same place. That was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Formed in 1867, this empire was basically a power-sharing agreement between Austria and Hungary, two monarchies under one crown, ruled by Emperor Franz Joseph. On paper, a clever idea. In practice, kind of a balancing act with dynamite under it. Franz Joseph ruled for nearly 70 years. That kind of stability looks good, until it doesn't. The empire was beautiful. Vienna was the heart of music, art, and high society, but outside the capital, cracks were showing. Nationalist tensions were everywhere. Slavs wanted their own countries, Hungarians wanted more power, and nobody really loved being ruled by a distant emperor with a big mustache. Then, in 1914, came the spark. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the empire, was assassinated in Sarajevo by a young Serbian nationalist. That one gunshot lit the fuse for World War I. The empire joined the war, and it didn't go well. Armies collapsed. People starved. Different ethnic groups started asking, why are we even still part of this thing? By 1918, Austria-Hungary was falling apart. Country after country declared independence. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary itself, and the monarchy? Gone. The last emperor, Charles I, tried to hold on, but nobody was listening. He went into exile. Austro-Hungary didn't fall because of just one event. It unraveled like a sweater with too many threads pulled at once. Austro-Hungary didn't explode, it just unraveled. The fall showed what happens when you glue too many nations together without asking if they want to stay. 4. German Empire. The German Empire rose fast and strong, a new player in Europe's power game. It was created in 1871 after a series of wars led by Prussia, uniting many small German states under one emperor, the Kaiser. Wilhelm II was a bold, confident leader who wanted Germany to be a global force with a strong army, a powerful navy, and colonies overseas. At its peak, Germany was an industrial powerhouse, famous for science, technology, and culture. But beneath the surface, things were tense. The Kaiser's aggressive policies and desire for war unsettled Europe. Then World War I broke out in 1914, dragging Germany into a long, brutal fight. Years of fighting, food shortages, and losses wore the country down. By 1918, German citizens were tired and angry. In November, the Kaiser gave up the throne and fled into exile. Germany became a republic, but it was a shaky start. The German Empire's fall was sudden but expected. War drained resources and patience. The monarchy just couldn't survive the pressure. 3. Ottoman Empire. All right, let's talk about the Ottoman Empire, one of the longest-running empires in history. Imagine a kingdom that stretched across 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Starting back in 1299, the Ottomans built a huge empire centered around modern-day Turkey, controlling key trade routes and cities like Istanbul, once Constantinople, the jewel of their realm. They ruled for over 600 years, surviving wars, changing rulers, and shifting alliances. But by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the empire was known as the sick man of Europe. Inside, different groups wanted independence: Arabs, Greeks, Armenians, making the empire a patchwork of tensions. Then came World War I, which really pushed the Ottomans to the edge. They sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary, but ended up losing the war. The empire collapsed, and in 1922, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk abolished the Sultanate. Ataturk then transformed Turkey into a modern, secular republic, changing the course of the region. The Ottoman Empire's fall was not just a political event. It reshaped the Middle East and laid the groundwork for many of today's countries. 2. Kingdom of Hawaii. Now, let's sail across the Pacific Ocean to the Kingdom of Hawaii. Unlike the huge empires of Europe and Asia, Hawaii was a small island kingdom, but no less rich in culture and history. In 1795, King Kamehameha I united the islands under one crown. For nearly a century, Hawaii thrived as an independent kingdom with its own language, customs, and traditions. But by the late 1800s, things began to change. American settlers and businessmen started to take control of Hawaii's economy, especially the sugar plantations. In 1893, a group of American-backed settlers overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, Hawaii's last reigning monarch. The monarchy was ended, and soon after, Hawaii was annexed by the United States, eventually becoming a state in 1959. This wasn't just a political change, it was the loss of Hawaiian independence and culture, a moment still deeply felt today. 1. Kingdom of Nepal. Last stop, the Kingdom of Nepal. Unlike some of the other monarchies, Nepal's royal family held on to power until very recently, all the way into the 21st century. Nepal was ruled by a king who was seen as divine, kind of like a living god by many people. This monarchy lasted from 1768 until 2008. But the kingdom's last decades were anything but peaceful. A brutal civil war broke out in the 1990s between Maoist rebels and the government, shaking the nation to its core. Then, in 2001, tragedy struck when much of the royal family was killed in a mysterious palace massacre, leaving the country in shock. Amid the chaos, King Gyanendra took more control, but the people wanted change. By 2008, after years of protests and political pressure, Nepal officially became a republic, ending its monarchy for good. The fall of Nepal's monarchy was about a people's demand for democracy and an end to centuries of royal rule, a dramatic shift in how power worked. So what do we take away from these 7 monarchies that no longer exist? Well, first off, monarchies ruled a huge chunk of the world for centuries. They were symbols of tradition, power, and sometimes stubborn resistance to change. But here's the kicker: no matter how grand, how powerful, or how eternal these monarchies seemed, they all eventually fell. Why? Because history doesn't like standing still. A mix of war, revolution, and people's growing desire for new ways to govern brought down these crowns. Some were toppled by bloody revolutions. Hello, France and Russia. Others collapsed under the weight of war and nationalism. Looking at you, Austro-Hungarian and German empires. Then you have cases like Hawaii and Nepal, where outside powers and internal struggles pushed the monarchy out in favor of democracy or new political systems. Monarchies were often seen as timeless pillars, but their fall reminds us that power is fragile and people's voices eventually demand change. All right, that's a wrap on our journey through 7 monarchies that don't exist anymore. It's wild how all these powerful kingdoms, each with their own culture, drama, and history, ended up just stories we tell. What about you? Is there a monarchy or old system from your part of the world you find fascinating, or maybe a story about power that sticks with you? Drop it in the comments. Let's talk. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like and subscribe for more history that feels like a chat with a curious friend. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time for another story from the past.